I would like to share with you some of the black history in reference to my father, Mr. James Gates. After being released from his civil duties in the Army, my father worked for the Old Sunshine Laundry. Some of you may be familiar with that. Sylvania then worked in the sanitation department of the city of High Point. Throughout his previous experience, he desired to better himself. At the low entry level of being a janitor at the High Point Public Library, which was on Main Street, South Main at the time, Mr. Neil Austin observed the potential of him being faithful in the work that he did. One day while at work at the library, my oldest brother Jim, who at that time was a little boy, came to work with my father. And he was sitting in the library waiting for my father to get off work. Another employee had informed Mr. Neil Austin that a little black boy was in the library. Mr. Austin knew that this was my father's son. He approached my dad in a mannerly fashion and said, "James, you know that blacks are not allowed to come into the library." Now this was around in the 50s. Okay, my father took a stand and asked Mr. Austin, "Is it better to obey man's law or to obey God's law?" You have to understand that my dad also was a minister as well. At that point, conviction was set in Mr. Austin's heart. He went home that night and gave much thought to what my dad had said. Mr. Austin made a decision to approach the board concerning this matter about blacks not being allowed in the library. He explained to the board that this was not right and that a change must come concerning blacks not being able to come to the library. Mr. Austin stood for what was right and also risked the chance of losing his job because of what my father had said to him. He was adamant about telling them if blacks could not come to the library that he was going to step down. This brought a dawning of a new era which then opened the doors of the High Point Public Library to blacks. Because of my father taking a stand for human rights of all blacks having an equal share in taking advantages of the services that the library had to offer. My father became a librarian at the same library in which he served as a janitor, which was on South Main Street. During the transformation of building another library located on 4th Street, which later became the Washington Street Branch Library, Mr. Austin gave my father the opportunity of working as a head librarian there. As years passed, my father was promoted to branch manager of the facility. He served close to like 42 years for the city of High Point. My father and Mr. Austin developed a close relationship even the day of my father's death. I can still remember him telling us girls how he appreciated my father, and if he ever needed anything, he was there for us. In honor of my father, I thank God for allowing him to speak a word that brought a change, allowing blacks to have an opportunity to enter the doors of the High Point Public Library, giving them the right as people, not based on the color of their skin. The community services which my father provided, including going to local schools in the High Point community, promoting the library to accommodate a place of quiet study, a place of information, knowledge, informing students that the library is an asset to help them to prepare for tests, exams, and homework. As a child, I remember the bookmobile coming into the black communities because of lack of transportation for blacks who were unable to go to the library. I also remember the summer reading program because my dad required it of us to go to that library for the summer reading program. As a final note, on many occasions, I have many people who tell me how my father encouraged them in their studies and to pursue a college career. Many have said they was glad that they listened to my father, and if it wasn't for him reaching out to the black community, inspiring them to move ahead and accomplishing goals that they had already set, causing them to have the current status of being beneficial in the work of employment and in the community serving others to be the best that they could be by helping our black communities look beyond the past and persevering to establishing not only being citizens of the United States of America, but citizens of the city of High Point, North Carolina.
If you can envision 1902, the year 1902, Rosetta Baldwin was born in 1902 in Graham, North Carolina. John and Mary Baldwin, her parents, were very close friends to Charlotte Hawkins Brown. And when Charlotte Hawkins Brown opened the school in 1902, they knew what they wanted their daughter to be, and that is in education. And so as Rosetta Baldwin grew up, and they kept that bond with that family, in 1908 they moved to High Point. And when they moved to High Point, they were smitten by the Seventh-day Adventist faith. John, Mary, and Rosetta decided to stay with the Seventh-day Adventists. Fannie Mae and Warren Baldwin, the siblings, since Mr. John Baldwin had first founded the Long Chapel AME Church in Graham, they said they didn't want to go with Adventist, they wanted to stay with AME. And so that was the beginning of their membership with St. Stephen's on Leonard Street. So that's how those two entities came to being. So as the story goes, Rosetta went to High Point School, High Point Normal Industrial Institute, along with Warren and Fannie Mae. And as time went on, Rosetta graduated in one of the first classes when it was the High Point Normal Industrial Institute. After graduating, she decided to go to Huntsville, Alabama, which is Oakwood College. And after graduating from Oakwood College, she came back to High Point. Rosetta Baldwin was one of the first teachers to teach at Leonard Street School. But she only taught there 1 year. And after that 1 year, she looked around and said, I don't like public school. I just don't like it. And so she said, I want to teach in a church school. And so Miss Rosetta left and went to LaGrange, North Carolina. And her first experience was on the dirt floor, one-room classroom. And then she traveled from LaGrange to Wilmington and ended up in Fayetteville. And in 1942, she was in Louisville, Kentucky. And her father died. And that's what brought her back to High Point. And in 1942, when she came in, she realized the children that her mother were babysitting could not read and write. And so she convinced the church and convinced the family and the community to bring those children to school right there in her living room. And so that is the significance of the house. This house is where Rosetta Baldwin started her classroom in 1942. After starting the classroom, it began to grow. And as it began to grow, the school had to expand, and her sister, Fannie Mae. One thing about that family, they believed in education. And between the three of them, they had 157 years of education in teaching. Fannie Mae taught for 36 years in Siler City, North Carolina, and Pittsburgh, North Carolina. Warren taught for 46 years. His first tenure was in Southern Pines. And one of the significance about Warren was when he taught in Southern Pines, he was one of the first principals to invite Charlotte Hawkins Brown to host her Women's Federation in Southern Pines. So that was the beginning of that pretty much history. But then he later went on and he was also taught at Carver over in Winston-Salem. And then he ended up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So his 46 years went somewhat that way. But Miss Rosetta, she outlasted them all. She taught for over 75 years. Over 75 years, and that is unheard of, and I doubt if you ever see any other teacher have that tenure in education. And so after that, and so I'm going to get on to this part about the museum. When she died, it was November the 25th, 2000. But let me say, as everybody always say, there's a difference between the day you were born and the day you died. And so Miss Rosetta lived a strong life. But what is significant about Miss Rosetta, as Annie will attest, and some of you all will attest, she was born on February 14th, Valentine's Day. And she lived every ounce of love. She expressed it, she gave it, and if you knew Miss Rosetta, you knew love. So after she passed, November the 25th, 4 days immediately after her death, the city of High Point, under the leadership of Mayor Arnold Coombs, Jr., proclaimed November the 29th as Rosetta Baldwin's Day in the city of High Point. Right after that, the state of North Carolina decided August the 5th, 2002, that they would change the street from Albert Street to R.C. Baldwin Avenue. Then immediately right after that, the Guilford County Commissioners, they unanimously proclaimed November the 29th as Rosetta Baldwin's Day. So not only did she have it in the city of High Point, she had it in the county. So prior to that, Miss Rosetta Baldwin was the recipient of the Order of the Longleaf Pine in 1996 from Governor Hunt. So folks, I'm just trying to get you an understanding how special Miss Rosetta Baldwin was. And I can not tell you how special she was to me. I just cannot just get it out to you. After that, her death, we decided to take her house. It was given to me by the family, and my brothers and sisters have told me to sell it, get some money, or turn it into a boarding house. And I just couldn't see doing that, and they said, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to paint it and fix it up. And we were able to fix it up, and then I started in May, and in November, when I finished, they said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to have a grand opening. They said, what are you going to call it? I said, I'm going to call it a museum. And that was the birth of the Rosetta Baldwin Museum. And ladies and gentlemen, it was actually created to honor the legacy of Rosetta Baldwin, her family, and other African Americans that made a contribution to the development of High Point. It's not only about Rosetta Baldwin. We have so many things in there that you need to come and be a part of. Because every day that you're living, you're a part of history. So that is pretty much a little bit about the Rosetta Baldwin Museum.
Once again, my name is Glenn Chavis. I was born and raised in High Point. 72 years old. Little Annie took me to school when I was a kid. I retired from Abbott Laboratories in 2000. And doing my family genealogy, I wanted to find out if there was anyone other in my family other than Carl Chavis, the Negro wife. Carl Chavis Memorial YMCA is named after my father's brother. So I went to the library and they brought me 4 books on the history of High Point. And only one had anything about blacks. And there were 3 pages about the nice little gardens they had in their nice little houses painted white. And I'm going like, this is ridiculous. So I got angry. But then my son came into the office and he asked me, Daddy, what are you upset about? And I told him. And he simply went to my board and he wrote the word history. And he circled H-I-S. He said, Daddy, his research, his writing, his interpretation, his audience. It's not their responsibility to write about us, it's our responsibility. And when they do write about us, I can tell you for a fact, we don't like it or it's wrong. I can take you upstairs now and show you that it's wrong. But guess what? We believe it because it was written first. I have a whole file of my 300 columns that I have written that have been published in the News and Record upstairs. But yet and still, when William Penn has their reunions, guess what they put in there when they started talking about the history? William Penn was founded in 1891. The Quakers started building on this land. How can you build on something when you're on the land? That's right. I have the deed. It was 1893 when they bought 5.1 acres of land from a black man by the name of James Day for $800. Day Street is named after James Day, a black man. He owned all that land up to St. Mark. As a matter of fact, St. Mark bought land from James Day. But a white person wrote that, and we believe it. The Quakers want to convince us, and I'm glad they did a good job. However, there were 68 blacks that signed a petition to get a freedmen's school up on Cherry Perry Street. Most of you don't know anything about Cherry Perry Street. It's up there on Washington Street. It's been gone for years. Okay? Now, that was the first black institution in the city of High Point. Okay? Now, does anyone, embarrassing, but does anyone know the name of the first public school, city-owned school in the city of High Point? The first city-owned public school in the city of High Point. Does anyone know? Okay. You know the reason we don't know? Because we don't want to take that trip back in time. We are lazy people when it comes to our history. I don't care what you say about me, we are lazy. We take what someone else tells us or whatever, and we stop there. Or we want to start history based on the time frame in which we were born. I was born in 1940, you want to tell me everything that happened on Washington Street after 1940. But if I take you back to 1920, you're uncomfortable, and you're like, oh God, I wish you'd shut up, you know. And you want to change it. You keep jumping in there trying to change it. It's about time for us to stop doing that and take that trip back. It's a lovely history back there. My book, Our Roots, Our Branches, Our Fruit, High Points, Early History, 1859 to 1960. I stopped everything in 1960. We think the world was created after 1960. Now, what are the first 3 words in the Bible? Thank you, thank you. Why do we want to continually start our history way up there somewhere? We have got to start at the beginning and come forward. I have read every page of City Council records from 1859 to 1971. I've got 250 pages that deal with us. Slavery was here in High Point. We talked about Juneteenth down in Texas. They were doing the same thing in High Point. It's right there in the records. Bring your slaves and your tools and work on the roads. But we're lazy. We don't want to take that trip. And we tell people things that someone else told them. Oh my goodness. And it goes on and on and on and on. I did not graduate from William Penn. I got married at the end of my junior year in high school. My wife and I got married. Guess why? And we've been married for 53 years. Mr. Sam Burford called me in and told me that I had to leave school. And the man cried. He just didn't want one of his honor students out on the National Honor Society Crime and Set Club working in the factory. So the man put me out about 10 o'clock in the morning, and at 1 o'clock he was down my house, loaded me up and took me to Greensboro and got me into Emmanuel Lutheran Junior College, where I finished the boarding school. And I finished my senior year. I thumbed, I walked, I did everything to get over the NT every morning. It cost $6 a month to go to school there. 1958, that was a lot of money. Wow. So when I graduated from Emmanuel Lutheran, he came over and picked me up, took me down to Johnson C. Smith University and got me a work aid. And I washed dishes and cleaned classrooms. Got a degree from Johnson C. Smith. My experience at that library that day that I was telling you about led to my writing. For the last 9 years, I have been writing a column that's published in the News and Record, over 300, about this community. I have been given a stage and I'm taking advantage of it. I've written about 60 for the High Point Enterprise. Well, quite naturally, the News and Record gave me the first opportunity, so I stick with him. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 4 other books that are ready to go. Right now, the editor's going over my information for the one dealing with the schools. I have something on all the graduating classes, just about from 1900 to 1968, when Penn closed. And I asked you to name that school. Did anybody see?
Favorite?
No. Oh, no, you were young. No, black school now. Black school. It was Fabian Street. Most people say William Penn or Little Street, whatever, but it was the South Side Colored Graded School. Public school. See, William Penn High Point Normal was a private school. You pay $6 a month to go there too, or work it out. Okay. So those are the types of things. Let me give an example. I love this thing of Ossie Davis was the principal at the school. They paid Ossie Davis it's $15 a month $15 a month to be the principal there, and the average white principal was making $90-something a month. And this was around 1910. The two teachers there was Ophelia Robinson, who married Dr. Morgan. Her family, that two-story house on Wash Street still standing? That was the Robinson house. Very smart people when it came to real estate. They owned half of High Point at one time. I had the documents. And the other one was a lady by the name of Miss Johnson. Now, they were making $20 a month. The Quakers kicked in, gave them 5, and gave him an extra 10. The Quakers. See, the Quakers didn't want to, the High Point didn't want to have anything to do with educating black kids. So they contracted with the Quakers. Up until the state told them that they no longer do it. So their last contract they signed was for $3,000. That's the reason we came up with Leonard Street School. So, oh my God, we got to build an elementary school for these colored kids. They already had a bond for $70,000, so they threw in another it was $50,000 for Leonard Street, which only cost $30,000. We don't know what happened to the rest of that money on that bond. But that's what happened. Also, but this is all our first black doctor, first black dentist, all those things that your kids need to know and be proud of. I got so mad I used to go to things and they would introduce Otis Tillman as the first black doctor. Tillman came here in 1958. It's unbelievable. These things are tired. I could go on and on with these jewels now, and but to get up there and accept it is ridiculous. So our first black doctor, by the way, was Garland Garrett, and he was here in 1890. So those are some of the things, and I'm very proud of the fact that my writing not only attracted attention here in High Point, but on a national basis. The holy grail of the newspaper industry, the Editor and Publisher magazine, did a column about my writing. And I'm very proud of that. There's not another black person in Guilford County, and very few, we haven't been identifying one in the state of North Carolina that ever achieved that. John Robson, the past editor of the News and Record, was on it, one of them. So that's where I spend my day. I've already spent 7 hours a day researching. I spend 6 hours a day every day, 7 days a week, and irritating my wife is my pride and joy. So she has to listen to this all day long. So that's the way of looking back at my wife. And I'll shut up. See, that's when they put me at the end. I'm going to start.
We went to school that day, school was buzzing. The teachers were trying to dissuade us. Somebody had leaked it, so they knew what was going on. We marched out of school at the end of the day. Went to 4th Street, where Reverend Elgie's church is today, New Beginning Full Gospel. That was our gym. YMCA on one side, gym in between, YWCA on the other side. His church was where we left our books, some of them. If you've seen the monument, you see we have books, pencils, and papers in our hands. We're doing homework. So we took just enough to do some homework. We had planned to go down there, but it was not to socialize. You see, we were on a mission, those 26 that were left. And the idea was to see if we could impact some consciences in this town. We had no clue whether we'd be successful or not. And that was not a concern at the time. All we knew was those kids over there did it. They were not that much older than we were. And if they could do it, because we were tired over here too, tired of not being allowed to do these things, we thought we'd try it too. And I have to tell you personally, I believe these white parents and these black parents were not going to allow them to put us in jail. I believed that in all my heart, and I prayed to the Lord that He would let that happen. That they would band together somehow, even on their sides of town, respectively, but not let us have to go to jail. Well, it didn't happen for us for a time. This particular day, we dropped the books there, we say a group prayer, and we marched downtown orderly. We don't alert the police or anybody, so we walk in the back door of Woolworths at approximately 4 p.m. That's why we have the prayer vigils on that anniversary date at 4 o'clock. It was about that time we walked in the back door. We broke off into groups, pretending to shop. Reverend Cox would doff his hat. That would be the signal to make a break for all the vacant seats at the counter. There were a few vacant ones. There were people seated there. One man was eating his dinner. When we rushed for those seats, all the others left except the man eating his dinner. He was listening to a transistor radio. There are only a handful of you in this room know what a transistor radio is. Okay, that was our iPod, our MP, whatever that is, more than that, okay? And you had to work the antenna to get the signal. But he was sitting there, and Kenneth Newland recalls, as he sat near this man, the song that came on the radio was "What in the World's Come Over You?" How ironic is that? Okay, so he finished eating his dinner, paid his bill, he left. He was not going to let us mess up his meal, and he didn't see that we were going to bother him, so. The waitress backed against the counter, folded her arms like so, and asked us to leave. Reverend Cox said, "We're not leaving, we'd like to be served, please." She went and got the manager. He did the same thing. He said, "We'd like to be served, please." He said, "You're not being served here today." He went in the back, we knew what was coming next. So here come two big burly police officers. They take their hats off and scratching their heads. They didn't know what to do with us either. You see, the others that had done it before us were all college students. We were high schoolers, and they didn't know what to do with us. So they pardon me, they commiserated a little bit. And then some of the town leaders were in the building. So the call had gone out. Then here comes a truckload of these folk that looked like Jimmy Dean, with the tight jeans and the white t-shirts, showing their pecs, with cigarettes, with roll-up sleeves with cigarettes stuck down in there, and this greasy hairdo that, I think even Elvis Presley wore one of those at one time. They called it a DA, but anyhow. They came in and they started cursing and yelling racial epithets and slurs and vulgar language, hatred like you've never seen, and trying to menace in our ears and on our backs practically. And you know, we just tried to duck. You know, if you felt a blow or felt the whistle of a hand coming at you, you know, you weren't going to be stupid and just stay there. Just try to turn that shoulder. Not turn the other cheek, just turn that shoulder to ward off that blow if you could. And that happened. We were jostled and pushed a little bit. And meanwhile, the manager makes the decision. I don't know if he'd been micromanaged and said, close the counter. He closed the counter. They cut the lights off, said the store was closed. Meanwhile, the others that had been acting so ugly, even these ladies dressed like they're going to church, the men in the business suits and stuff, they were acting just as ugly as the thugs that came in on that truck. They made two lines out that front door. Well, we had to go out that front door, so we had to go through that line. And the line started here, and it was coming closer and closer as we were trying to walk through. And we walked back to Washington Street, the top of Washington Street, but we knew they weren't coming down here. But they were pelting us with snowballs because it had snowed 3 days earlier. They had razor blades and needles and nobody was hurt. We got back to the Y, said a group prayer, fell in each other's arms, the girls, some of us crying, from relief and release. Because it had finally been done, and we knew we were going back the next day. Next day, when the seats were roped off, we stood behind them and sang. Went back the next day. They were taken up. We went on to the next door. We broke that down. Went to churches, went to the park, City Lake Park, went to the movie theaters. And eventually, things happened. But it would go on for 8 years. And then the Human Relations Commission was formed. And it still is. There's a lot of work to be done.